Tomb Raider Definitive Edition, really, we looked at it from the end of the current gens. We did PS3, 360, and PC. Those were the starting points for this next-gen version. What we find the most, I should say, on next-gen is it's about the particle systems, it's about the environmental effects, it's about the movement, and that kind of sense of immersion that people want in a world in next-gen. When we made texture maps for the characters in the game and the world itself, even on the last generation, you make them as high a resolution as you can, but you always have to kind of squeeze them down to a smaller size, just that the actual bitmaps themselves take up memory. But for Xbox One and PS4, we were able to go back and take all those textures that we had done and blow them out literally 4 times larger than they'd ever been. So those details, those minute details, when you get really close in on a texture from a camera's perspective or from a player's perspective, you can see those fine grains in the leather jacket on the back of one of the bad guys. You can see the actual cloth inside of Laura's t-shirt. You can actually see textures of her skin. They don't look kind of gray or washed out. They're incredibly detailed. It makes you feel like they have little pores or bumps on them. That's the kind of stuff you can get to from the actual art textures themselves. Say, how far can we push Laura and do our first steps towards what a next-gen Lara Croft could look like. That meant taking the entire model and doing a topology pass across all of her body. Physics as far as the objects attached to her, but also the shape of the body itself is pretty much the same, but higher resolution. The texture maps are higher resolution. And then from the head and the face, all that was rebuilt from scratch to give kind of a new look for what we think a next-gen Lara could be. But we also did something specific for her skin called subsurface scattering. When you add subsurface scattering, it means the light goes through the surface to that kind of right beneath the surface of the skin, spreads out or scatters, and actually gives that kind of soft glow or kind of a soft illumination to the object, or to in this case, her skin. So it gives a much more realistic look. That, on top of everything else we did for Lara, really makes her stand out in a way that, when you look at them side by side, is very, very impressive. Now, once we had that physics system, we said, let's apply that to the world. So even on last gen, if we had bushes that moved or things that would bend and react to you, we only had a few of them because they were painstakingly put in there by hand by the artist. On top of that was a particle system. We had some really good particles and some really nice looking environments that felt like, oh, there's fires going on here, or there's debris coming out of this particular object. But for next gen, we had the chance to go somewhere between 5 and 15 times more particles depending on the area, and dynamically lit particles. So you see certain areas like this World War II bunker that Lara has to infiltrate. When she gets up close to it, there's a searchlight off in the distance that's sweeping through a heavy rainstorm. In the last gen, you'll see it's all kind of the same tone, it all has the same look. You can't really distinguish the searchlight or the rain. In the next gen versions, you actually see this conical light from the searchlight slicing through the rain, and the raindrops actually light as they individually fall through the actual light surface itself, getting lit dynamically. And that kind of richness, some of the areas, for example, when she's escaping one of the Solari fortresses, the smoke now pools onto the ceilings. You actually have this much thicker, heavier sensation in the air. You'll see Laura's skin dynamically change into sweat because it's a warm, tense environment. You'll see the smoke on the ceiling. You'll see extra embers glowing in the environment around her. All of that adds to that visual storytelling and that visual fidelity that we pushed for on next gen. We kind of cheated the fog on last gen. It was a great trick of having these two-dimensional fog planes out there that help highlight what's called level of detail. So objects that are far in the distance can go to a much smaller scale, so they don't have to have as much cost on the processors for rendering. That level of detail, when they're much less detailed, they're much easier to draw. But in this next-gen version, we could push those levels of detail all the way out so that everything can always be at high detail at any place on the map. That means there is no kind of mysterious Claritin-like effect where there's this gray fog over the screen. That's all been pulled off. So instead, everything you see is always there. You don't have weird shadow lines. You don't have objects kind of disappearing in the distance. It's all visible out to the horizon. This is really the first attempt for us with our engine, with our character on next gen. I can't wait to see what we do next.